What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back to the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube for the latest episode of Broncos Now. As always, I'm your host, Sydney Jones, and coming up on today's episode, we'll hear from head coach Sean Payton and general manager George Paton as they look ahead to the 2023 NFL Draft. All that and more coming up. With the 2023 NFL Draft just a week away, we heard from head coach Sean Payton and general manager George Paton as they held their annual pre-draft press conference. George Paton opened up the press conference by discussing how his team has been preparing for next weekend.
We've been in a bubble for the last month grinding, obviously on the draft process. With the draft a week away, there's excitement there. We just finished our draft prep, our meetings actually on Monday. Now we're doing special projects, clusters, trying to determine a consensus with the coaches and scouts. So watching a lot of tape, actually doing some mocks. It's hard to mock a third round, but we're giving it a go. So things are going good. We had a medical meeting Tuesday with Bo and Vince and the docs. Can't thank the doctors enough, for all the time that they put in for the past 2 months, going over all the medical. Rich Hurtado has met with us yesterday on the post-draft free agency process. Appreciate Rich. And then just the analytics department. We'll meet with them the rest of the week. But, I feel my first 2 drafts here, I thought the process was really good. And I think, with the addition of Sean, we've even enhanced it. We've taken the next step. Sean, he sits in all our meetings. He sounds like a scout. He's been around a lot of really good people throughout his career. He reminds me of Coach Saban, just sitting in meetings. The 2 years I was with Coach Saban, they have a similar, vision of how they want to build the football team. They have a clear vision on how they want to build the team. I'm aligned with Sean in that.
Both Coach Payton and George talked about what their mindset is heading into the draft.
When we're watching these players, all the time, philosophically, you're looking at, all right, who would be a target that if they fell, you might move one direction, and then what would be the 3 or 4 scenarios where if presented with that scenario, would you gain equity and move back? And I think, look, 95% of the discussion in the sports world relative to the draft is on the first round, understandably so. And yet, man, there's so many other things that take place later that are important. So George alluded to it already. If you're in the middle of the first round selecting, you've got to love 15 players. If you're picking 15, you've got to, and if you don't, then you move in one direction. Or if you're targeting someone, you move up. But when you're picking where we are, in the unique thing, which I think we both really like, is that we have back-to-back picks there. You've got to be able to be a little bit, I don't want to say reactionary, but the scenarios that fall to you with every round and then every pick, the spray is a little wider, if that makes sense.
You want to have flexibility. You want to have an open mind. With Sean, we talked last night about potential target players that we would go get. So you just never want to be closed-minded. We've traded up where I've been. We've traded back a lot. It kind of depends what's behind you as well. Last year, we felt we could trade back 5 or 6 picks and still get Dulcich based on the teams behind us. So you do a lot of these exercises, and we'll continue to do them. We've done them the last 2 weeks. And so, there's not a lot of surprises because we'll talk through every scenario. We're both open-minded to move up, move back, and it just kind of depends where it is.
Plus, Coach Payton talked about the challenge that comes with only having 5 picks this year.
The whole preparation leading up to this draft was grading from the very top of the board through the first round, through the second, as if you had every pick, even more picks. And so you're assigning values to these players that not only will serve you well in the draft, but they'll be recall and free agency 4 and 5 years from now. Each draft is a little different, and I say that meaning where the clumps of players are. I've been involved in drafts where we felt like 20 first-round talents, and then other drafts where we felt maybe there'd be 28. So the challenge always is to not remember the prior drafts, but what's your barometer for the value of each player that you're trying to grade, and then the strategy relative to how you can draft the most amount of players that meet your threshold that you really like.
And in other news, Coach Payton discussed how the voluntary offseason program has gone so far.
It's our first chance to meet, interact, and be around. And so, it was kind of quiet crickets here for a while. And then last Tuesday was the beginning of it. The guys are lifting and running. And then, phase one will gradually move into phase two. We haven't forgotten about you guys in the media. I think, we understand that you want to visit with those players, and that's coming up in phase two, I think. But it's gone well. Putting names with faces, because there's been, for a month, George and I'll talk about our personnel, and I'm getting the names down, but they're like, magnets on a grease board until you actually get a chance to see them. So we're a little over a week, and it's great to be meeting a lot of these players.
Now joining me here inside the Broncos podcast studio is Broncos lead writer Aric DiLalla. Aric, appreciate you joining me on the show again today.
Of course.
Yeah, it was great to hear from Coach Payton and General Manager George Paton today. With the draft now just being a week away, it's kind of crazy. It's already here.
Yeah, and it seemed like for a while there we were going to talk right up to the time the draft got here.
I thought the same.
A lengthy pre-draft press conference, as Sean Payton noted toward the end, but a lot of good stuff in there and a lot to take away.
Definitely. Yeah, Aric, going off of that, what were your main takeaways really from the press conference?
Yeah, I thought one, from a draft standpoint, you talk so much about the trade history of Sean Payton.
Yeah.
Goes up a lot. I did a piece the other day, Sid, on our site, and over the last, I believe, 13 drafts, the Saints made 22 trades. All of them were trading up. And then you compare that to George Paton moving back in the draft more often than not, and you kind of figure out, hey, how do those work together? And it was interesting hearing Sean Payton and George Paton talk about that process of, hey, we've identified a list of guys that are worth going up to get, and we've identified situations where, maybe there's not a guy on our board that's worth that value, so that's when we'll move back. And they are, I think, in sync about that. It doesn't mean that one approach is going to win out over the other.
Right.
I think it's more about being on the same page. They talked about there being a lot of really good collaboration. And I think, Cindy, anytime someone new comes in, you kind of want to know, okay, well, who makes the final call here? And that's the fun thing to talk about on talk radio, but it doesn't really work that way, which we heard on Thursday. They're going to talk about all these players ahead of time. They're going to figure out what's the approach we want to take. And then on draft day, you've already got your list in place. And
those things are already decided.
Exactly. You're not making those big decisions on draft day. So that stood out from a draft standpoint. And then, additionally, they talked about we've met all our big needs in free agency. So we truly are able to go after the best available player. If they hadn't have taken that approach in free agency, maybe you don't have that same ability. And then just from a non-draft standpoint, talked about, hey, they're running and lifting, and Sean Payton was asked, how's the classroom work going? And he said, no, I said we're running and lifting. That's what we're doing. So it's very different than the approach Nathaniel Hackett took a year ago when kind of threw it all at him at the very beginning, got a head start on learning it. There's time for that, and the Broncos are not diving into that right away.
Yeah, we heard Sean Payton talk about that a little bit earlier in the show as well, Aric. It was kind of interesting what you said, just the collaboration between George Paton and Sean Payton, because, Sean was with Mickey Loomis in New Orleans for so many years. This is his first time with a new head coach, really, or new general manager, really. So it was interesting to hear how they're going to collaborate and how they're going to work together over really the past month, but heading into next weekend as well.
Yeah, and I think what helps there, Sid, is that they both are grinders and they sit down and watch the tape. And we heard George Paton say that Sean was like a scout in there and asking questions and, grinding the tape. I think he said that they watched, this was on Thursday, so he's talking about Wednesday, and they watched more than 1,200 snaps of just three guys and ended up moving one of those guys up in their draft rankings based on what they saw on tape, what they heard from the medical staff. And I thought what Sean Payton said about, when we come up with our favorite players in the draft, we look at, what do mock draft people have to say? What do draft analysts write about their strengths and their weaknesses? We watch the highlights. And Sean said, no, it's about more than 15 to 18 plays. We're watching years and years of tape. And so I think that shared love of football and their ability to kind of, go forward and, look at the tape helps them get on the same page and kind of figure out what are we looking for from an approach and a philosophy standpoint.
Right. Well, another topic that George talked about was Jerry Jeudy's fifth-year option. He kind of reaffirmed that they're really high in Jerry and that he's not going anywhere.
Yeah, no direct answer in terms of the fifth-year option. The deadline there, I believe, is May 2nd, so it's right after the draft.
Coming up,
if you look back on what George Payton has done in the past, obviously Bradley Chubb, his fifth-year option was picked up during the draft.
Right.
I
forgot about that. Yeah,
heading into the second round, and so it's possible that we find out about that during the draft.
Yeah.
At this point, their Broncos are probably not going to select anybody that's going to change that decision one way or the other. The only thing that would change that is a trade, right? And George Payton and Sean Payton have both been very adamant, hey, we're not interested in moving Jerry Jeudy. He's going to be there. So, you would think that they would pick that option up, but we'll have to see. Everything they've said kind of suggests they want him here. But, the thing with a new coach, Sid, is that we don't really know how they want to handle things. Some coaches like to say, hey, we want that extra year under control. Some coaches say, hey, let's go out there and prove that you're this guy for a whole year, and then we'll deal with the financial kind of trickle-down effect later. So it'll just be interesting to see kind of what approach the Broncos take. But you're right, they want Jerry Jeudy in Denver.
Yep, definitely. Well, one other thing I found that was really interesting, Aric, head coach Sean Payton said he was really impressed with the analytics department here. And he said, he's never really seen anything like that and that they're on another level here. I mean, what does that say about the group that, George Payton has here?
Yeah. I mean, obviously George Payton has done a great job putting together the front office. I think part of it, you think about analytics, think about game day. How does this help during preparation for a game? But the other side of it is obviously this free agent evaluation, draft evaluation, and everybody has an analytics department to some degree. But it sounds like the processes that the Broncos are using are maybe a little more advanced or a little more, helpful to the process than what Sean Payton is used to. And it's good to hear there that the Broncos are using kind of every advantage they possibly have. Yep. And it dates back to me, in my mind, to what Greg Penner said at the beginning of the offseason or when the Broncos parted ways with Nathaniel Hackett. It was one of those two press conferences, and he said, hey, we're going to evaluate every single aspect of this organization and see what are we doing well, what are we not doing well. Right. And clearly that's an area that the Broncos feel like they're excelling
doing really well. Well, outside the press conference news, it was announced on Thursday, Aric, that DeMarcus Ware, Terrell Davis, and Jake Plummer, they're all going to announce Broncos draft picks next weekend as well. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's exciting. Obviously, the Broncos don't have anything to announce in the first round, but the league has an NFL legend or a current player for every team announce a day 2 pick. So DeMarcus will be doing that in Kansas City. He obviously announced Justin Simmons' selection back in 2016. So knock on wood that he gets another good one, that he's a good luck charm there in terms of the selection. And then you mentioned TD, Jake Plummer. They're going down to Mexico. They'll announce the picks from Mexico City, a 3-day tour here. They're going to be joined by one of the flag football representatives who was featured in the NFL Super Bowl commercial. Yep. So kind of a cool integration there. But yeah, always great when you get to see some of these guys, some of people's former players get up there and announce a pick, and they get the crowd going a little bit. Yeah. We've seen our friend Steve Atwater do that before, so it's a cool deal for them.
It definitely is. Well, only a couple more days until we'll be doing the thing.
That's
right. Looking forward to it.
We're getting close.
Yeah, we are. We'll appreciate your time, Aric, today.
You got it, Sid.
Well, that'll do it for today's episode of Broncos Now, Broncos Country. Thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure to meet me right back here on the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube next week for the NFL Draft. I'll see you all then.